What's up guys, this is going to be our overview video of the Protean on our lackluster backdrop here. We rearranged and cleaned the shop, so hopefully that's not too distracting and blaringly white. Anyway, this is the Protean. It's a design by Flygonial, the maker of the Gryphon that we all know and love. The Gryphon's been out for many years, and he decided to go ahead and make another type of blaster that emphasizes modularity and quick swappability. They're not exactly the same though. There's quite a few specific differences in the Protean that make it a whole new blaster and doesn't really replace the Gryphon, but we'll talk about some of those differences in this video. The Protean specifically is another full-size flywheel blaster, meaning it has the right size to be able to be a compact but still not just a small pistol platform. So the Protean is, you can see it has a more sci-fi look, going for a more kind of chunky or substantial look to it. I like to call it it's more substance to it. It's like thicker and blockier, but more sci-fi. And so that's a kind of a form look. Overall, the form is nice. It is, again, a little blockier and bulkier. You can see compared to normal Gryphon, it's a little bigger in the middle. It's not too much bigger. And of course, the magwell, or the flywheel cages are gonna be thicker, but the rest of it is a little bit thicker as well on the Protean. So it doesn't feel as lightweight and run and gun. It's a little bit chunkier, more of a personal preference thing though on that. But overall, it is like a really solid platform, and we'll talk about that later, where he designed a lot of the prints to be much thicker, and so the prints are actually taking it, I think, the bulk of the force, or the bulk of holding it together. So a lot of the thicker, chunkier prints give it that more substantial feel.
Hey, watch middle, watch middle.
Woohoo! You have a standard straight worker talon magwell, pretty standard for most blasters these days, with a normal paddle mag release. It has an extended and a lever version. You have your flywheel cages up front. You do have these quick swap muzzle attachments that are not super tested yet. He mentioned that like he's trying some different things with them and stuff, but if you do get it to work, then you do have that option of swapping out, you know, different bearing setups or different BCAR setups for adjusting your accuracy depending on what cage you're using, and it's kind of a cool feature to be able to quick swap those out. Like the default Gryphon, it is a semi-auto trigger, so there's two triggers. So the bottom trigger, you'll rev it up, and the top trigger, you'll fire, and you have that semi-auto action. There is a full auto version and a solenoid version in beta as well. They're not fully tested yet. But like the normal Gryphon, you have that semi-auto function. The entire blaster, this is the main key, that he designed it to be a lot more modular than the standard Gryphon. Now the standard Gryphon does have some modularity with the cage screws behind the magwell, and the magwell grips under the grip, and then the stock screw under the back of that. He took that design and then he beefed it up by using these pins, and he made it faster by having the pins instead of screws. So the cage is mounted onto this receiver by these two pins here, and then the stock is mounted onto the grip with these two pins here, and the cage itself is mounted into the lower receiver by a pin in the middle, so you can take off the top and take off the bottom. But then you can take off the top there. Then you can remove the pin in the middle to get to your cage. So we have a dual stage cage setup. Like lots of other blasters, you have a dual stage and a single stage option, and now that you have these pins, it's a lot easier to swap out on the field or between games. Unlike the Gryphon, which it's 4 screws, so not too bad. I mean, a few more if you take off the cover, the wire cover on the side, but this is definitely a lot more modular as far as doesn't use screws goes. Another cool thing is he has this lower rail grip on the bottom, so he's got Picatinny on the bottom and then designed a grip to go over the magwell as well. So you've got that more like ergonomic choice, again, personal preference there, but that's pretty much how it functions. You do have the battery tray in the back. This is the extended tray, which you don't really need unless you have a massive battery, but that's nice and convenient because then you can have an adjustable rod stock for whichever length you would like. And then you also have the option of, like we said before, of just swapping out these pins, and then you could do, say, like a buffer tube stock. Then you can put on your buffer tube, like a normal Gryphon buffer tube here. Boom. Replace those pins. So there's the buffer tube option. So again, super modular, super quick to swap out and take down if you're into that kind of thing with different cage options. Take those pins out, put a new cage in, one blaster to do them all. And the official version does have bullet connectors, but you may want to call them something else in case, you know, people in the community, the Nerf community, get mad at you for saying that. But the bullet connectors are on either side that then connect into the cage to the rest of it. So that's cool that instead of like a XT30 or XT60, he designed it to be two positive and negative independent paths of travel for extra minimalistic look. The pros are, you know, different stock options, which is super handy because some people don't like buffer tube stock. Some people prefer more sci-fi rod stocks or what have you, or be able to 3D print whatever. That is a big pro of the Protean. Pun intended, is that it is designed mostly, like I said, around the 3D prints. And so the 3D prints themselves provide a lot of the durability. So he designed the prints to be thicker. So overall, it's a little bit chunkier and bigger, but there's less hardware. And so instead of relying on screws that then thread into the plastic, which can then easily strip, either the plastic or the screws can strip with all of those M3 screws, there's less hardware, and so you're putting a lot more of the force on the actual pins, which are big, and the prints themselves. So there's less hardware, so it's actually more durable overall, with the prints being the deciding factor of how the overall durability is. Because it is mostly printed and less hardware, it is overall cheaper, depending on the prints, of course. With being able to print it yourself, you can then save a lot of the cost on hardware because there's less screws. The pins do offset some of that cost as well with how more expensive pins are than screws. But overall, since there's less screws, I found the build a lot easier and faster because you're not worrying about putting in so many screws and stripping anything or having to worry about torque. So it slaps together pretty fast. If something breaks, you can just reprint it, and it's just a bunch of pins to swap it out. I might switch over from using a Gryphon when I'm able to have one, since I usually sell my own Gryphon too often to actually keep it for an event. If I have a dedicated dual stage, higher FPS Gryphon, then I'm probably gonna keep the Protean instead, and then swap the cage out for a single stage when I need it, so I don't have to have so many blasters I have to worry about. So he's got sling points, these sling mounts that you can detach on either side. Is really handy to have something in the middle so you can sling it and it'll stay slung where you want it, versus in the back where it's totally vertical, or in the front where it's gonna be upside down. Having somewhere in the middle at that nice angle is really nice for that fast, quick slinging action if you'd like. He also has designed one that's compatible with swing swivels or like workers quick release points, so that's nice. He also has, of course, the different BCARs. He also has the different grips on it as well. Currently, he himself has not designed other add-ons, but I know the community, there's probably going to be, if there's not already, angled Talon magwells and Nightingale magwells and different kinds of add-ons like that and different stock options. Not a ton of people have done that yet, but I'm sure there are people who have adopted this platform already. In the top of the magwell, there is a spring-loaded piece you can put in to act as a mag eject. So if your magwell is a little tight, that can help it push it through. But also if it is already a gravity drop magwell, without that, by putting that in, it's kind of like a lower powered zinc eject where you hit the button and then the mag pops out on you. So that just makes it a little bit nicer of getting the magazine out. So that's kind of a cool feature he has built in for those who want, those bells and whistles that are functional bells and whistles. The only one thing I don't like about the way he designed it or has it set up is that the mag grip itself, in order to reload, because that grip is in the way, you almost have to get used to holding your mag lower and putting it in that way, which generally is not as good as holding it higher, so that way you can get a better insertion, but then your mag grip is in the way. So unless you're used to it, that can be kind of a hang up for you. The cage options are nice. So for the performance of the Protean itself, you have the dual stage and single stage cage setups, and he has a bunch of different crushes for those, such that you can get different performance out of different cages. So this is a standard 200 FPS setup for those 200 FPS flywheel cap games. but you could also do a band blasters dual stage setup as well. That also works for a 300 or 250 FPS, or drop it all the way down single stage 130, 150, whatever have you. And now you don't have to worry about getting all of a whole new nose for that, or unscrewing and screwing in all the screws. The cage itself now is only one pin, and then the cage, which honestly is just a couple of motor screws, and these covers if you want the motor mounts, or the motor covers. But you can actually use the same upper receiver as well. You could use a different upper and lower to get the single stage instead of the dual stage bulkiness. I'm really excited for the Protean. We also have these stock bars that are designed for a worker stock, but I don't believe they sell the bars themselves, or if they do, we don't actually have any in stock. So these are actually fit for 8mm. You can also use a 5/16 rod and just cut some notches in it. So here we've CNC'd our own notches into these bars, so we can have our own stock and have notches wherever you want. Maybe I'm gonna put one here for me, that's where I like it. And then you can even Dremel or hacksaw out your own notches such that you can have the stock exactly the length you want. And then he also has a shorter battery cover, which is gonna be the standard because that fits most lipos just fine. You don't need a massive door. So make that smaller, make the stock smaller, then you have overall an even smaller platform, easier for transport, and then a little less weight, but you don't just need the extra room, so why have it, in my opinion. As far as some of the cons go, there are less Picatinny rails than the Gryphon, with it having an upper and a lower, and most Gryphons having an upper, a lower, and a side, and then more side if you get the longer nose and the dual stage. And so we got lots of rails up top. The Gryphon definitely pulls it back from a super practical rail heavy to a more sci-fi aesthetic heavy build, I suppose you could say. Because it is mostly 3D printed, again, your ease of building will come down a lot to your prints. As far as some of these pins are kind of loose and some of them are kind of tight. And so that can be an issue if you're just new at 3D printing, or you want to just print it real quick and slap it together. There is a little bit more involved than just slapping it together. I mean, some of the pins holes you might have to drill out or hammer in, so there might not be a quick swap right away. And then again, if they're too loose, depending on your pin, the pins could fall out, which is a big con with people who know about like the pin systems. Having those pins fall out is not fun, and so most pins do have a detent, ball detent, or a ring, or a cotter pin that goes in the back of it. But he actually, that's one con, is that he designed it for pins that are one size fit all, which means some pins are going to be sticking out. These are pins I cut to his recommended length, and they stick out quite a bit, but then some of the pins don't actually stick out enough, so you can't actually get a cotter pin on the other side. And so a con there is the hardware, I think, could be more optimized. So in our kits, we're going to be sending you multiple lengths of pins such that you have just enough room that the pin is sticking out just enough to then retain it. If you want to retain the pin, if it's too loose. Otherwise, if it's not long enough and it's too loose, then you're going to have to bend the pin and rely on friction to hold it in. And if it's way too long and sticking out, then I think that's just not very, kind of ruin the aesthetic. It's a nice geometric shape, and having the pin stick out like this one would stick out quite a bit if you use the same length of pin for this one as the stock pins. And so fits and tolerances, of course, with anything 3D printed, it overall having less hardware, but that hardware having to fit in more specific places. The biggest thing I don't like about the Gryphon, particularly now the Protean compared to the normal Gryphon, I do believe it might be similar, but the trigger pull is a 1-to-4, so you're pulling the trigger really far each time you cycle. And so I think it's harder to get that responsive. If I'm gonna shoot and I pull the trigger, I have to then wait for myself to pull the trigger all the way. You have to kind of know where that wall is, and then to reset all the way back and then reset back to that wall, it's a lot longer. And so it's not something that you really have to worry about if you're used to it. It can be a muscle memory thing, but if you're looking for something fast response and kind of snappy, I found that this is slower, especially getting those rapid fire shots off. You have to go so far. It gets a good workout in your index finger. The last con is it is a flywheel blaster, so it is going to be louder, and it's going to be expensive because of the wheels, and even more expensive if you get a bad jam. You do run the risk of burning out your motors or your flywheels and having to replace those. And so that is a pro and con of the flywheel system in general. You get a lot of fast follow-up shots, but they can jam and burn up, and there seems to be a lot more wear and the heat build up and stuff like that to worry about than just a Springer, which is a spring and air seals. So if you like O-rings better than electronics, then that's a con for you. But if you're looking for something that can deliver the follow-up shots, the Protean is definitely a good contender. That's the Protean by Flygonial. Let us know what you think. I do know that you can get a hardware kit, depending on who you get it from, for between 60 and what, $100, something like that. And the blaster itself, anywhere around that same range, 130 to 200, 250. Let me know what you think of the Protean. Some of you may have seen it already. Maybe some of you have already built one. He was also designed to use 3D printed pins. I checked the lengths though. The 3D printed pins he designed, they do add a little bit more color, so it's cool to be able to print the pins in a different color, but they are the same length as well, so you're still gonna have them stick out on the other side. Not the end of the world, but I personally think that if I'm gonna be making my own pins or customizing the hardware, you know, might as well get the length just right. But overall, let us know what you think of the Protean.